First of all, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. Mr. Bishop, thank you for that opportunity, for Smart Justice Alliance, for allowing the Department of Corrections to be at the table. And contrary probably to popular belief and contrary to past practices, I want to be the first one to tell you on behalf of Secretary Jones that we want to be at the table and that we want to remain at the table, as Ms. Brown spoke of. There's a lot of things that we need to do differently as an agency. There's a lot of things that I'm going to talk with you about today that we've missed the boat on as an agency during my 26 years. Some of it I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you about. And if you haven't figured out already, you've heard the most eloquent speakers today. I'm not the most eloquent speaker that you'll hear. I promise you that. I'm not from New York City, if any of you's thinking that. I'm from very rural Dixie County, Florida. I was raised right here in Florida in a very rural county. Very proud of that upbringing. One of the speeches I do, I tell folks that I had a drug problem growing up, that I had a very serious drug problem, and that drug problem is the reason that I'm here where I am today. And that drug problem that I had is I had a mom and dad that drugged me to church about 3 or 4 times a week. And they drugged me out behind the house when I didn't do right. And my dad drugged me to the timber woods to cut cedar posts to sell for money. And I was very blessed with that upbringing, very blessed with that drug problem that I had. And the Lord has blessed me in my career. And I'll stop here and tell you that I'm a Christian, and I'm not ashamed of that. And the Lord has blessed me, and the Lord has opened doors for me and allowed me to work in our system from correctional officer to now being the deputy secretary. And for that, I'm thankful. And that's nothing that I've done. That is because the Lord has opened doors for me and has blessed me with that opportunity. And while I'm talking about that, I want to tell you how pleased I am to be here today and see so many different people from so many different groups. And I've met many of you through past times, and I've met some of you today for the first time, but all working towards a common goal. And I honestly mean that when I say that. I do believe that we all have the same end result in mind. There's no doubt about that. We have the same end result in mind. Sometimes we go about it in different ways, but it's so refreshing for us to come here today and come together. And I want to tell you that you don't meet people and you don't run into people and you don't start relationships at these type events by chance. But I believe God has a hand in that as well. So a lot of the people you meet today and a lot of the things, the relationships you start is not by chance. And I want you to follow through with those relationships and work hard to make things happen. Like our last speaker said, Ms. Tudhill, who done a great job, be that person that makes things happen. Don't be that one that just sits around and watches for it to happen. And they are a lot of game changers in this room. There's a lot of people in this room because you care. And we're going to talk about that some today. But it is an honor and a privilege to be here on behalf of our new secretary, Secretary Julie Jones. We look forward to partnering to change our culture, to change the way we're viewed in corrections. Our vision for the Florida Department of Corrections is changing lives to ensure a safer Florida. Changing lives to ensure a safer Florida. I walked into this agency about 26 years ago, and during that time I've worked for 10 secretaries. So our average secretary during my career has been around for 2.6 years. That speaks volumes there. That tells you where part of our problems are. That no organization with leadership that changes every 2.6 years can be 100% successful. We're going to have challenges and we're going to have barriers. And that's something that we need to fix. And we will talk about that some. But I do think that Governor Scott absolutely picked the right person to lead our agency. Now, I'm from within this culture for 26 years, but I can honestly tell you from being around Ms. Jones and hearing what she brings to the table and seeing the unique skill set that she has, we absolutely got the right person to move our agency forward. I promise you that. So I look forward to big things in the future. Changing lives to ensure a safer Florida. And when I talk to you today, you'll soon realize that I speak from the heart. I have some notes here, but I'm going to speak to you from the heart. And I'm going to tell you some things that's been laid on my heart to talk to you about. I walked into this culture 26 years ago as a correctional officer. I knew absolutely nothing about the prison system, absolutely nothing about what our mission was at the time. What I knew is I had a son, and my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, and that I needed a job with some benefits, and I needed some health insurance. And I'm being honest with you when I tell you that. And I walked into this, and I walked into a culture that told me I was supposed to hate inmates. That's the culture I walked into. That they have blue on and you have brown, and for that reason alone, you're supposed to hate them. And it's okay to talk to them any kind of way because they're beneath you. That was wrong 26 years ago, and that's wrong today. And I'm embarrassed by when I think back on my career, early on in my career, and even some years later, if you would have asked me the question Miss Brown posed to us, you're the Department of Corrections. What do you do? What do you do, Sergeant Cannon, or what do you do, Officer Cannon, or Lieutenant Cannon? What do you correct? What does your agency correct? I'd have had to drop my head and be ashamed because I wouldn't have had a good answer for you. And that's sad. That's sad, but that is reality. Oftentimes, many of our staff during those times, we viewed corrections as the inmates were here for punishment and not as punishment. If you'd asked me what was our role in public safety, I would have said, well, the average inmate has about a 3-year sentence, and our role is to make sure that person don't get out of that fence during those 3 years. Our role is to make sure we make them follow the rules, and that way they don't want to come back to prison. That was stupid. That was silly on my part. As I've matured as a man and as a correctional professional and as a Christian, I come to realize that our role in public safety, if we know that the average sentence is less than 3 years, if we know that the average inmate getting out of prison is about 33 years old, then our role in public safety is we have this person for about 3 years. If they don't come back to prison, they're going to live in society for another 40 years. So how can we impact public safety? We impact public safety by what we teach that individual, by what we train that individual, how we educate that individual. Probably more importantly than all those is what we model for that individual. What kind of behavior do we model for that individual? One thing I've learned that's really humbled me in my 26 years is I've talked to many men, many on death row, many incarcerated for different ranges of sentences, many just prior to their execution. And the common thing I see with our population is a lack of a male role model. You men out there, all of us, me, that want to make a difference, then we should all be mentors. We should all be mentors to our youth. We should all be that role model and model the right behavior that they need. I was naive enough to ask questions like, son, your dad didn't teach you this? Because I was blessed with a good parents. Like I told you earlier, I was blessed with good parents. And my paradigm was I thought everyone else in the world was like me. But I would ask those naive questions like, son, your dad didn't teach you differently? Your dad didn't tell you what the consequences were of some of these things? And what I heard was, Mr. Cannon, I never knew my dad. Mr. Cannon, I'm a victim of a rape, and I never knew my dad. Or, Mr. Cannon, my dad, I know who he is, but he never wanted anything to do with me. Never been in my life. I've never had anybody to tell me or teach me anything. Well, what about your mom? Well, Mr. Cannon, my mom put me and my sister on the street when we were 12 to sell our bodies where she could buy drugs. So what this corrections experience has done for me is it has humbled me. And it's made me realize, but by the grace of God, I'm not standing where they are. And we owe it to them to be that role model. And we owe it to them to make sure they get the programs and the educational opportunities and just the opportunities in general that they need to be successful. And that's where changing lives to ensure a safer Florida comes in. That's not just warehousing someone for 3 years or for 5 years or for 20 years. And we have many inmates with 20-year sentences. We have many inmates with life sentences. To be quite honest with you, some of the best friends that I have on this earth today, I met in the last 26 years, and they still wear blue. Some of them that I check on frequently. Some of them that writes me frequently. We owe it to those people to make sure we're changing lives to ensure a safer Florida. That is what we do. That is what we have to do. Mr. Bishop talked about us going around the state. Secretary Cruz at the time and we went to 49 prisons. And we spoke to the leadership and we spoke to the staff at those prisons. And the common thing that we kept repeating was this. This is not your dad's Department of Corrections. Or this is not your granddad's Department of Corrections. Now when we say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is we've got many second, third, and fourth generation staff. So those war stories they've heard and those things they've seen is how they think business should be. So to change our culture, we have to change that. And we got to model the right behavior for them. Another sad fact that is a reality is in my little short 26 years, and I started the day my daughter was born. The day I started work, January 27th, 1989, I had to miss work that day because my wife had to have a C-section and my daughter was born. So when I say the short time, seemed like yesterday we went and got her from the hospital. I brought her home from the hospital and now she's turning 26 on the 27th of this month. But what is sad is that in that 26 years I have personally had in my dorms or at my prison or whatever rank I happen to be in, I've had 3 generations of inmates. I have actually had a grandfather and a father and a grandson. So we're missing the boat as Floridians of breaking that cycle. We've missed the boat somewhere of breaking that chain. And you, the people in this room, have the ability to break those chains. If we come together in unity, if we work together, we can break those chains. And we have the right people in the room. This summit brings the right people to the table. What we have to do is forget those things of, well, that's her idea. I don't think we want to do that because we're over here. And that's his idea. We don't want to do that. And that's Senator Evers up in Northwest Florida, and we're in South Florida. We don't want to do that. We got to all work together. We got to all work together to solve these problems. And it can be done. It can be done. Here's what I want you to realize that we lose sight of. We read the paper, and we think of these monsters that we have incarcerated. But when you go sit down with most of them, you find out they're human beings. You find out they think just like me and you do. You find out that they've made mistakes just like me and you have. One of the questions I asked when we traveled around the state was this. I asked every staff member that I came in contact with in those meetings. I said, I want you to be honest with yourself, and I want you to raise your hand, and I'm going to ask you this same question. Either a childhood friend, a relative, an adult friend, an acquaintance, a schoolmate, is there anyone that falls in that category that either is currently or has ever been incarcerated? I want you to raise your hand if you know someone that fit in one of those categories I just talked about. Childhood friend, schoolmate, relative. Most of the people, you can put your hand down, most of the people in this room raise their hand. Did that make you stop caring about that person when they went to prison? Did it make them any less than a human being when they went to prison? Now, I won't ask you to raise your hand now, but have you ever done anything that could have possibly landed you in prison? Have you ever had that drink and drove a vehicle? Have you ever been around a situation that could have went south and you'd have wound up in prison? I think that'd be 100% if we raised our hand on that. So we're dealing with people just like us. We lose sight of that sometimes. That old culture has to change. And we have made strong, large strides and strong efforts to change that culture. These meetings, some of our policies that we've changed, participating in this summit, things that we're doing innovative that I'm going to speak to in just a minute to try to change that culture and break those chains and break those barriers. That is where we want to go. It's sad when you think that you have someone here that started as a correctional officer and he's seen 3 generations of inmates from a single family. How sad is that? Probably if we collaborated the right way early on with DJJ, things that Ms. Walters has now put in place, if we'd have had them years ago, then we probably don't have someone that can stand up here and speak to 3 generations. So we got some things in place and some things working. that I think will change this speech in the future. But I ask our staff, how do we impact public safety? Because I did not get it as a correctional officer, and I did not get it as a sergeant or a lieutenant or whatever that rank was. I didn't get that. I actually thought, honestly, that the way we impacted public safety was that we just keep them behind the fence, and that's keeping the public safe. I was simple-minded enough to think that, but understanding now that public safety goes way beyond that. How's that person going to act and behave when they get back in the public? And we have an opportunity to change that by programming. We have the opportunity to change that with our reentry efforts. And that's the key to what we do. We have to change that old culture. Too often our administrators and staff view our agency's mission as a task limited to maintaining safe and secure institutions. That's what we think of. Really not their fault. They've been in security their entire career. That's what's been drilled into them from the day they walked in the door. And they see a different side of it. I have the opportunity sometimes to talk to some of our former staff, like David Harris over here. Where are you at, David? With Bridges of America. Cecilia Denmark. People that came up in our culture like I did, now they work with a different area of what we do in public safety. And I promise you they see things so differently now. So that we need to learn from those kind of folks. We need to learn from those experiences. Embracing the added goal of preparing prisoners for reentry represents a major shift in our correctional thinking. And that's not easy to do. When you've got that captain out there that's been in this agency 20 years and he knows one way or she knows one way, it's not easy to change that thinking, the way they think. And that won't happen overnight. It's going to take us a gradual shift to do that, and we are working that way. We've recognized that there's a need for a more holistic approach to rehabilitating inmates, not warehousing, but rehabilitating inmates by providing reentry programs, interventions, treatment, and care. I want you to think of the criminal justice system as an assembly line. I want you to think about from day one, and we've heard from many different speakers already, police hand off arrests to prosecutors, who in turn bring it to court, bring cases to court. Judges impose sentences of prison or supervision or maybe jail time. And at the back end of all that assembly line, it may be a year and a day later, or it may be 2 years, or it may be 5 years, or it may be 25 years. That inmate is released from prison. And we don't think of it that way. We think of, well, they have 100,232 today incarcerated in Florida. That's not counting supervision. 100,232 incarcerated today. That's what the count was this morning at 8 o'clock. So we've got that many people in prison, but just like Ms. Brown touched on, every year we release about 33,000. So that 100,000 we have, we turn over 33,000 every year. Last year we gained about 400 less than what we released. So we gained a little ground last year. In years past, we went the other way. Went the other way where we actually gained more than we released. But last year, we was to the good, about 400. But every year, we're turning over about 33,000 inmates. Of that 100,000, about 90%, 89.7%, are going home one day. Like she said, whether you like that or not, that's happening. Whether that person's a sex offender, whether they're a murderer, whatever the case may be, burglar, whatever, they're coming back in our communities. When we miss the boat on any of those, they're coming back to prison. I'm happy to say that our recidivism rate is down to about 27% from 33% a few years ago. So we have got some things working, got some things moving in the right direction. But 27% recidivism rate, 27 out of 100 coming back to prison, not to mention the dollar amount that represents. Think of it this way. If I come back to prison, that's because I've reoffended, so I've created a victim. Now, on the national average, we don't catch criminals on the first time. As good a work as our law enforcement partners do, the average is about 3 crimes before we catch them. In other words, if I'm a bank robber, I've robbed 3 banks before I get caught. Now, don't you go rob 2 banks and think you're going to be okay. Well, that won't work. You'll be the one that gets caught the first time. But on the average, about 3 victims to each one returning to prison. So now factor in the dollar figure and think about the court cost and the victim's impact for everyone that we missed the boat on. We can't afford to miss the boat on anybody. We got to make sure that we got the right programs, that we're targeting the right inmates to be in these programs. But it is like an assembly line. That last step of releasing those inmates back in society, unfortunately in the past, has been the one that received the least amount of attention. In the past, we would give an inmate $100. This is the Department of Corrections. We would give the inmate $100 and a bus ticket to go back to their county of origin. Because of our budget deficit situation about 3 years ago, we made a decision and said, we can't afford that, let's give them $50. So that was cut in half. Now, I want you to think for just a minute about technology and the way that's changed and the value of $1 and the way that's changed in the last 10 years of your life. I want you to think if you were put in a box and 10 years later you come out, how would you function in society as it relates to technology? If you came in 10 years ago and had $50, when you got out and I gave you $50, you would think, well, I got a little bit of money. But when I put you on that bus, the first time you stop at McDonald's or somewhere, you out of money. So they're getting back to their county of commitment, and every inmate is returned to their county of commitment. When they get back to their county of commitment, they don't have a job, they don't have any money, don't have any resources. More times than not, their family hasn't remained in contact with them. What is the chances of that person being successful? What are the chances of that person being successful? Those are the kind of things we have to change. So now we put an inmate on a bus, give them $50 to some that qualify, all don't qualify, and say, good luck and don't come back. What's their chances of success in that scenario? Almost zero. Barriers faced by offenders or ex-offenders include employment, obviously financial, housing, substance abuse, medical and mental health problems, strained family relationships, little or no education. Every inmate that comes in our system, we test. Everyone goes through a battery of tests. The average inmate scores out to a 6th grade education. The average inmate scores out with a 6th grade education. So what I like to tell our staff is that that inmate that you're dealing with, that inmate that you're talking with, that inmate that you're counseling with, has the educational level, in most cases, the mental state of an 11-year-old. So does that change the way you deal with them and talk with them? It should. But that's the reality of it. A 6th grade education. Now you've been out of society 10 years and we're going to give you $50 and say good luck. What's the chances? Nil. We can no longer rely on just traditional approaches alone to carry out our mission. It's going to require an innovative, broad systems approach to rehabilitation and reentry. What is the answer? We've heard a lot today about evidence-based programs, evidence-based practices. The sheriff talked about several. Our answer is transitioning from prison to community initiative. That is a holistic approach. The best thinking and evidence about how to manage transition and reentry successfully for community safety and reduced victimization. The mission of transitioning from prison to community initiative is to reduce crime by implementing a seamless plan of services for high-risk inmates that have been targeted to reoffend. Another thing that we're doing is testing these inmates, and every inmate now receives a recidivism index score, which measures their risk to recidivate. We need to get the right inmates in the right program at the right time. If I have a life sentence or a 20-year sentence, there's no need to get me all this program when I get to prison, and then for 19 years I don't do anything and then you turn me loose. So we've got to be smarter about the way we do it. I really like what I've heard today about being smarter on crime. That's what we have to do. This plan of transitioning from prison to community begins day one the inmate's incarcerated. If they have that 20-year sentence, then it's a 20-year plan. If they've got a 1 year and a day sentence, it's a 1 year and a day plan. And what we need is more individualized service plans for inmates, individualized release plans. One size don't fit all. All of us in the room have the same goals of enhancing public safety, reducing recidivism, reducing victimization, and saving taxpayers' dollars. How many of you in this room are taxpayers? If you don't raise your hand, I'm telling on you now. I'm looking around to see. We all have a stake in it. All have a stake in this. I've got 5 grandkids. I don't want them to have to bear the burden of a $2.4 billion prison bill every year. Even though I work in corrections, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want us to see us reduce that, and how we reduce that is by reducing the prison population, and that can be done. All of us in this room have the same goals. We have a reason, all of us have a reason to be at the table, because we all want the same end result. Collaboration means strength in numbers and strength to effect change. Too often we haven't worked together. We've got to change that. I pledge to you on behalf of Secretary Jones that the Florida Department of Corrections is going to do a better job of working together. And we do want to be at the table. And we do want to change. I don't like what I read in the newspaper. Even though what I see in the newspaper, I know about 30% of that's truth and about 70% of it's made up. I don't like the 30% that's true. We've got to change. We've got to do better. By working together, we have a greater chance of effecting that change. The Department of Corrections, Office of Reentry, and our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Ms. Sutherland, stood up earlier. Stand up again, Ms. Sutherland, if you don't mind. She's going to be here all week. Please talk to her. Please bring your ideas to her. Please let her educate you on what we're doing. Please ask her to come visit a prison. Please ask her to, let me come see what kind of programs you're doing. Senator Evers and our other elected officials, you come see us unannounced. You tell me 2 hours in advance where to meet you at. We encourage that. The Department of Corrections Office of Reentry is dedicated and committed to making impact on the department's culture and in the lives of men and women across this state. I want to take a few minutes to talk about some of the initiatives that we have already implemented in the past year. First of all, the 2014 Florida Legislature passed House Bill 53. The new law requires the Department of Corrections to ensure that all Florida-born inmates are released with an ID, with a certified copy of their birth certificate and a Florida identification card. When that was passed, I believe we were about in the high 30s or low 40s as far as inmates being released that actually had identification. As of last week, we are at 81% of eligible inmates being released from prison having that Florida ID. That's because of the great work of our institutions, because of the great work of the Office of Reentry, and I appreciate that, Ms. Sullivan. Reentry centers. The Florida Department of Corrections operates 4 reentry facilities: Baker, Polk, Gadsden, and Sago Palm. I would welcome you to visit one of those. We're in the process of opening 2 additional reentry facilities: Everglades Reentry and Baker Reentry Center. That will be an additional, in addition to the current Baker facility. The reentry centers encompass a new way of thinking and operating. And that new way is that recidivism score we talked about, getting those higher risk inmates in some programming at these reentry centers. We designed those more secure than a common work camp or a work release center to get that higher risk inmate in that facility and get them in the programming that they so desperately need. The inmates that enter that facility are within 3 years of release. We've tried to strategically place these around the state where inmates that are housed there will be released to that close proximity to that facility to work on their family reunification, to work on other issues to help them be successful. Really excited in my time, in my 26 years, to see us going down that road. I've had some conversations with Secretary Jones. She has some very innovative ideas about our reentry department, especially as it relates to these reentry centers. So I guess what I would tell you in reference to those is just stay tuned. There's some things that will be coming out and coming up that I think you'll be very pleased with as we move forward with that. But this model provides a seamless delivery of services for the transitioning inmates, which includes transitional housing, continuing substance abuse treatment, job placement services, etc. Let me go back to that substance abuse. My education in this state And like I told you, I'm not in my position because of an education. I'm sure you say, we can tell that by the way you talk, the way that is. My card says speaker, and I bet you're wondering what language does he speak. I guess Dixie County is the best way to answer that. But my education has been around this state from as far south as Fort Myers to as far west as Santa Rosa County in these prisons. And I've worked with countless number of inmates, countless numbers of staff. And what my education has taught me, that we have a percentage of inmates that we say, well, they're in here for a drug charge. They're in here because of a substance abuse issue. But when you really talk to the inmates and you delve into their situation, the vast majority, no matter what they're charged with, you can trace back to a drug problem. Not the drug problem I was blessed with, but a true substance abuse problem. Most of our inmates, if you delve into their situation, you'll find out it goes back to some form of substance abuse problem. That's an area we really need to grow in. We really need some programs behind the fence at our prisons, not just in our work release centers, not just in our lower risk facilities, but in all of our facilities. So I don't know how I got off on that, but that was free. Don't worry about that. Family reunification. I told you what I've seen and how it humbled me about inmates not having that person in their life that mentored them or they looked up to. Every one of us in this room, if I ask you why you're successful, every one of you, if I say, tell me a word that you can think of that makes you successful, you would tell me words like work ethic and integrity and honesty and all those kind of words we like to talk about. And then if I went further and said, I want to ask you another question. Where did you get that from? Every one of you, someone would pop in your mind, whether it was a parent or a grandparent or a friend or a pastor or whoever that person was, someone will jump in your mind and say, you know what? My dad taught me this work ethic. My mom taught me to be honest. And then if I go a step further and I say, well, what did they tell you? How'd you get that from them? Every one of you would think of things that you've seen them do, behavior that they modeled for you. In other words, if your word was honesty, and you said, my dad taught me to be honest, and if your dad told you all your life, daughter, you need to be honest. That's the most important thing in this life is you got to be honest. Or son, you got to be honest. And then every time you seen your dad walk in Publix or Walmart, you saw him put something in his pocket and walk out without paying for it. Do you think you'd be honest today? Because people do what people see. John Maxwell says the number one lesson in leadership is people do what people see. I really love and read John Maxwell. And that's what he says the number one lesson in leadership is. Those inmates I'm talking about has never had that person in their life. They've never had that person that modeled that behavior. They've never had that person to look up to. That's why we are where we are. We have to have programming. We have to be those people that models those type behaviors. Family reunification programs. Many of them have a support system out there, but they've done so many things in their life that they've separated themselves from that. And one of the key things we can do to make them successful is that reunification process and work with them to reunify with their family. So in that vein, supporting families of the incarcerated is not only considered good public safety policy, but it's also considered best practices for reentry services. The visiting park is one of the most important areas where we can reconnect families of the incarcerated. There are over 64,000 children of inmates in Florida. 64,000 children of inmates. Through current substance abuse contractor services, Transition Services was able to implement the Preventing from Inside curriculum developed in-house. This curriculum focuses on parenting, goals of parenting, effective discipline, family communication, conflict resolution and negotiating, effects of parental incarceration, child maltreatment, and protective factors. Another area that we can really partner with DJJ and with children and families on. Our state agencies must work together to solve these problems. can't be in silos. I've heard that word used a lot today. We can't work in silos. We must do a better job of that. In an effort to introduce family members to the inmates' positive accomplishments, the Department of Corrections extends invitations for family members to attend graduation ceremonies at the institutions. I've spoke at a lot of graduations, and I can't tell you how many mothers has come up to me crying afterward and said, "Thank you so much for my son getting his GED. He's never accomplished anything like this." I can't tell you how much it means to hear him and see him emotional about it and see him accomplish something. That's amazing. That's the part I missed as a prison guard. And I hate that word. People's used it here today, Mr. Bishop. We have correctional officers, not prison guards, but I had a prison guard mentality when I started. And I didn't see the human side of what we do. And thank God I see the human side of what we do now. And I thank God for putting me in a position to help effect change to where all of our staff can see the human side of what we do. That's what this is about. I think everyone in this room has that same desire for us to be more humane and more human and have more compassion in what we do. Another area that we're working on is the Second Chance Act, a two-phase adult reentry grant program. We was awarded $750,000. This program design will focus on comprehensive assessments and planning, pre-release program services, individualized transition planning, seamless post-release services, and linkages to community services. Another area we've worked hard on and really grown, and this is going to sound a little bit silly to you, is dog training programs. That don't sound like much. But I want you to think of that family pet you had growing up. And I'm a hard man. I don't mind telling you that. I'm a hard man. I've got a lot of dogs. I've got a lot of hunting dogs. I hunt. And I hunt with dogs. I've got a lot of hunting dogs. And I bought my daughter, when she graduated from high school, a miniature Dachshund. And she moved off to college, and pretty quick, that miniature Dachshund was sleeping with me, the first dog I've ever had in the house. And her name was Lily. And I grew to love that thing, I'm telling you. And last year she got killed. And I'm going to tell you what, this hard man cried. It like it broke my heart, did break my heart. I didn't realize what goes along with caring for that. I didn't realize, and I've always had the hunting dogs outside in their pens, but to have this one that really became a part of my family really changed the way I viewed some of these programs that we do. But we've expanded the number of dog training programs statewide from 16 to 22. Again, you don't know the value in that until you go to one of those graduations and you see that dog being adopted out and you see that inmate that has been the trainer and the caretaker of that dog in tears, and they've learned that I am responsible for another being and I have to take responsibility and there's certain things I have to do. That is a worthwhile, worthy program. So I'm glad to see us grow in that program. To date, we have graduated over 2,600 dogs and about 2,930 inmates through that program. You'd be amazed what change you see in them based on that. Faith and character-based programs. This programming offers inmates an opportunity to participate in a variety of activities and classes focused on personal growth and character development. This initiative has demonstrated positive effects on inmate institutional adjustment and behavior, which results in fewer disciplinary reports compared to our general population. Currently, we have 3 faith and character-based institutions, 1 female and 2 male, and 13 facilities with faith and character-based dormitories. Now, I know there's a lot of folks that advocate for only faith and character-based prisons, and I respect that point of view, but I have firsthand seen the effect that a lot of these dormitories have on the rest of that compound. When you only have 1 dormitory at a prison, I've seen the calming effect it has on the rest of that compound. I've seen inmates from those other dorms come to the staff and say, look, I want to get out of this gang, or I want to get out of this. I want to be a part of whatever they're doing over there. That I see a difference in them, and I want to be a part of that. So there's value in having it dormitories versus institution-wide as well. Now, there's many advantages to having the institution-wide. faith and character-based programming. But I've really seen the effect, too, on an institutional basis, and I'm a proponent for that, for having them in different institutions. Another thing about that is we do have 3. That's institution-wide, but I may have an inmate that lives in, that resides maybe in Bay County or Gulf County, and he's housed at Gulf Correctional Institution, where we have a faith-based dorm. Well, if I say you can't be in that, we're not going to have that anymore, now you got to move to another part of the state, well, he'll just say, well, I don't want to be in faith-based because I want to stay close to my family. And we shouldn't ever make an inmate have to choose between being in a program or being close to their family. So hopefully we can continue down that path. Combined, these 2 programs have about 6,500 beds. I am a Christian, and I'm a strong believer in the faith and character-based institutions and the dormitories. I have seen lives change because of that. If we change lives, it's because we change people's heart and we change their way of thinking. And that's how we change lives. Collaborative partnerships such as God Behind Bars and the Northland Church, which offer 4-phase reentry programs. How that works is God Behind Bars, or Northland, partners with a mega church, or Northland being a mega church, near a prison, and they streamline live worship services into the facility. When we first started that, I was a little doubtful. I hate to admit that, but I was a little doubtful that inmates would become involved and want to participate in that, but we've had resounding success with that. The inmates have really embraced that and bought onto it. It does them good to be in a service and hear a pastor at one of these mega churches say, and to our congregation at Hart ECI, we're glad y'all with us this morning. And it's live streaming. So we've seen some great results with that. Different phases of that. And I promised I wouldn't speak 90 minutes. I better speed up. I'm proud to announce in that same vein that this month, the Florida Department of Corrections, in partnership with the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, has established the first ever accredited theological seminary at Hart ECI. This program offers a 4-year bachelor's degree from the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. The seminary will begin classes in mid-January of 2015, so that's about to start. This has been one of the Office of Reentry's major projects, and it's taken them almost a year to complete this, and I'm very proud of their progress on that. These ladies in the Office of Reentry, and I'm really surrounded by ladies now, with Miss Brown being Miss Jones being the secretary, and then following 3 dynamic speakers today. But I'm very impressed with their passion and with the way they've seen things through to make us successful. One of the things that I'm really impressed with them is thinking outside the box. Too often in corrections, especially in Florida, I get the answer, well, that's the way we've always done it. Well, why can't we do this? Well, boss, that's the way we've always done it. And I have been around 26 years. I've worked for 10 secretaries. Every secretary we've ever had, with the exception of one, I've worked for. And I've seen many times the answer be, well, let's don't change because that's always how we've done it. But since reentry begins at day 1, that's our mantra now. Reentry begins at day 1. We got to start effecting change day 1. We've started some pilot projects and changed the way we think in some areas. One of the things that we've done, that test I told you that we gave for all the inmates, that battery of tests, whether it be education, vocation, whatever, happened on their second day of incarceration. Well, if I'm a new commitment, I'm scared to death, number 1. I'm in a brand new environment, and the second day that I'm there, you're going to sit me down in front of a test, a TABE test, or whatever the case may be. How well am I going to do with that? So one of these projects is that we've started working at the Florida Women's Reception Center to enhance the inmate's chance of success by beginning that case management process and not doing that test until later. And we've already seen much higher test scores because of that. So that's something that we'll probably be moving into statewide because of the Office of Reentry and their innovative ideas, and that's a good thing. Thinking for change, T4C. T4C is a cognitive behavioral intervention designed to reduce recidivism. It's an intense program comprised of 25 lessons in self-change, social skills, and problem solving, whose main message is thinking controls behavior. Again, we got to change the way they think. So this thinking for change That's something we've really embraced. It's being taught by contract staff as well as department staff, and we will continue to grow in that area with the Thinking for Change classes. We've started an online high school diploma program, which began as a pilot at 2 institutions 2 years ago, and has now been expanded to 15 sites. Think about trying to get a job without a high school diploma. Many of our inmates are here for that very reason, because they can't obtain gainful employment because they don't have the education. They don't have that high school diploma. So to start this online high school diploma program and expand that to 15 sites is huge. The things I've talked about, and I've spoke to you about some things from my heart that I truly believe that many people are like me in this agency, that they walked into a culture that they ought to be ashamed of. I'm ashamed of the culture I walked into 26 years ago, and I truly want to be a part of changing that. I want to be a part of changing that because it's the right thing to do. I want to be a part of changing that because one day I'm going to answer to somebody a lot higher than Governor Scott. And when I stand there that day and answer, I'm going to have to be held accountable for the way I've done business and the opportunity. I told you the Lord opened doors and put me in this job. Well, that comes with responsibilities. And I truly believe I'm going to have to answer to that one day. So I pledge to you, as long as I'm around, we're going to work for change. And we're going to work to do what's right and treat people right and do the things that's smart justice. And smart on us as taxpayers that we all raised our hands. Things I've talked about is just a few of the accomplishments that have been made over the last year. I promise you we're moving in the right direction. Are we there yet? Of course not. You've read a lot of things in the paper. Can I tell you that every one of our 23,000 employees will do the right thing every day? Certainly I can't. I can't tell you that those 5 grandkids I got to do the right thing this hour, much less 23,000 employees. Can I tell you that almost 101,000 inmates will make good decisions and that we won't have to use force or we won't have a bad situation happen in one of our prisons? Certainly I can't tell you that. I'm not naive enough to tell you that. We're not there yet. But we are working hard every day to develop new partnerships with employers who are willing to give men and women a chance as they leave prison, and on probation a second chance. We need your help. That passing this inmate and this offender off to the community, that takes collaboration. That takes a plan for all of us. Every provider we have has a part in that, and we all have to work hard to foster those relationships. Men and women are released every day from our custody and return home only to have doors closed in their face. We've had them for 3 years on the average, and we've told them all these great things, and we're going to help you. And they walk out the door, and the door slams in their face. That's where you fit in. We got to do a better job of making sure those doors stay open. Transitioning from prison to community requires the community to be ready for that pass-off. If we work together, we can do this. I heard someone say in speaking, baby steps. Baby steps. We didn't get where we are overnight, and we're not going to fix it overnight. But we do have to do these things. We do have to have these baby steps to make those big steps. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. And I warned you going in that you wouldn't hear the most eloquent speaker that you would hear here this week. But I did speak to you from the heart. It's been an honor to speak to you. On behalf of all the men and women in our agency and Secretary Jones, let's work hard to change lives to ensure a safer Florida. That is what we want to do. Thank you.